people aspire to have a successful career, have a great career. Like I wanted to be a Major League Baseball player. I kind of got pretty far, but it didn't happen. Darren wanted to be a famous actor, but not everyone, has plans on being VP of one of the, in my opinion, greatest, and my wife's greatest companies in the world, Amazon, And so is that something that you always dreamed of? And if so, how did you, or if not, how did you get to that level? How did you pull it off? Or is that just something that evolved over time?
It partly evolved and was later in my career than intentional. Once I realized I wanted to be in leadership, I then started targeting more impactful roles. But to begin, as a kid, talking about being a kid, I read a lot of dinosaur books. So I wanted to be a paleontologist. And my father was like, yeah, nobody buys dinosaur bones. You'll starve. And I'm like, museums. And he's like, museums ask for donations. They don't have any money. So he was really raining on my parade hard. And so then we got an Apple II. And I actually wrote Apple Computer a letter in high school. This is pre-AOL even, and said, hey, I love your computers. I want to work for you. Where do I need to go to school? And they listed 5 schools, and I went to one of them, and I thought I would go to Apple. I ended up in tech, but never quite made it to Apple, or haven't yet made it to Apple. My goal was to be an engineer and design computer hardware, so I majored in computer engineering. And then as time evolved, it didn't take too much time. I got into my first job, and I realized tech puzzles are fascinating, but human puzzles are mystifying. And I migrated very quickly to team leadership. And then eventually after that, as I started to see managing lots of people is harder than managing a few people, and you get to do more. That's where I can honestly say then I went on to the executive track and started looking at how do I get a big job? And that took some time.
Do you see yourself as, I don't know, like a unicorn exactly, but somebody that's interested in engineering puzzles and the human puzzle? How important is it for you to be able to bring both of these things together? Is that if you don't have that human puzzle interest, can you even be a big successful leader?
I think there's all kinds of successful leaders, and it's hard to pin down a single mold. For example, obviously a big successful leader would be Elon Musk, but I don't think too many people think he's deeply interested in sort of human puzzles. Like he sort of makes clear, I don't have time for that. As an example, now I'm putting words in his mouth. Maybe he would disagree, but I think there's a balance. That said, you may not want to spend time on people, but at some level, you have to figure out how you're going to inspire and communicate with large numbers of people, because that is the job. To some degree, you can hire that out. If you're enough of a visionary, you can, most of the great leadership teams in history are collaborations. Obviously, we had Wozniak and Jobs. You have, Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg. Over and over, you can find the sort of tech talent allying itself or finding its counterpart that in communication. I do straddle both, maybe more than some. Is that a unicorn? No, but you must find your mix and tool set. And I think a lot of it is understanding your weaknesses and how are you going to compensate for them, because I believe we rarely truly get rid of a weakness. We just get better and better at minimizing, managing around it.
We wanted to talk about path to leadership, but I think we also want to talk about finding meaning in work, because I know you really enjoy helping people with that these days. But let's start a little bit more with this path to leadership, and then we'll get into some other topics. But what do you think are those key skills and behaviors that people should be working on right now in business to help you if you want to take a path to leadership, whether you become an executive or not? What should you be doing?
So leadership has lots of components, of course. I think the somewhat new umbrella term that captures many of them is emotional intelligence. So the ability to understand others and empathize, but also then the ability to relate to them, followed by the ability to influence. So all of the so-called soft skills. And there's lots of evidence, even if you never intend to go into personnel management, that in the end, soft skills are much more defining in your total success level. And good news, they're much more learnable. There's, IQ is a concept lots of people have arguments with, but for the moment, I'll just accept it as a thing. And if you accept it as a thing, it's relatively harder to modify. EQ, your soft skills, I started as very low EQ. One thing I said early in my career is, people say I'm a loose cannon, but that's only when I'm pointed at them. I was just, they complain, but it's only because I'm telling them how full of it they are. I look back at some of my early behaviors and shudder. But you can learn and change and improve those. People who know me from then can't believe who I am today. Not for my accomplishments, but my behavior change. And people who don't know me hear stories either from me or from people who did know me, and they're like, I've never met that Ethan. And that's just 25 years of investing in learning emotional intelligence, relationships, empathy. Some of it, I guess, probably comes naturally with age and experience, but a lot of it was intentional.
I want to put you on a spot. Do you have any good stories from back in the day of maybe how you handled a situation and you're like, oh man, why did I do that?
Yeah, when I think of early in my leadership, just a catastrophic mistake. First, I was made a leader at about 25, which meant I was managing people for a long time in my career. I was managing people who were older than I was. And there is still generally a thought, of there's both a general thought in our society of respect your elders, even if it's not a lot different, but also this thought that a kid that young can be wet behind the ears and not know. I had an employee who worked for me. He did some good work. He had some, what we call improvement opportunities. But I had to do my first ever performance review of this man who was probably only in his early 30s, but the relative difference of me being 25 and him being, say, 32 or 33, I'm sure he felt much more experienced and knowledgeable. And in many ways he was. So I wrote his review and, tried to honestly call out his strengths and tried to give him a specific list of his areas of improvement. And he hated me from the end of that hour for as long as, I think if we called him up today, he'd be like, oh, I haven't heard from you in 30 years and I still hate you. Because I think it was just having someone he saw as much younger, newer at the company, full of arrogance, which was probably true. Passing judgment on him and being in a position to do so was just intolerable. I might as well have been, scraping his skin with sandpaper for an hour. And I just had no real awareness that now if I had to approach that same situation, I honestly would approach it with something like, I would lead with a question. I have a couple areas that I could suggest you might want to think about differently. Would you like to hear those? And part of the reason I would ask that question is psychological. If someone says yes, their mind starts to tell themselves they meant it, because lying takes a lot of effort. And so even if they say, oh, yes, but, you just get their buy-in and you try and read their body language, and there's other approaches I would take. I have a couple areas that you could work on, or that I think you might want to consider, let me just leave those with you so that you can look at them if you want, and just totally softball it, because everybody's going to read the paper, right? Nobody's going to actually, like, once you leave the room, nobody's going to be like, yeah, I don't even want to know. I don't even know what people think of me. They're going to read it in secret, but like, you're not putting them on the spot. Whereas probably I don't remember every minute of this interaction. I just remember how much she didn't like me after that.
Okay, well, speaking of stories, I think it's time to trot out one of the chestnuts that you tell, and that is a learning from failure moment. You can't think that the people that report to you are going to never make a mistake. If people make bad mistakes and they make the same mistakes over and over again, then they're not a good fit. But what you want in that moment of, the fire, how do they respond?
Mm-hmm.
And everything in your story would make me think, okay, this is the kind of person that I can trust in an emergency situation, because the way you reacted was you got very tactical and how do we fix this? I'm going to update you. I have a very clear plan about how I'm going to march forward. You didn't get emotional. You went into action mode and you maintained good communication. And the fact that you continued to be there with an ownership attitude and you weren't going to back down from being in a meeting, all of that would actually make me trust you in those fundamentally important ways. How is this person going to be in an emergency?
Yeah. And I would like to say I was totally planning that. Now, well, yeah. I spent a lot of time after the fact kind of post-analyzing how I handled it. And then when I faced any crisis, because this was about in the middle of my tenure at Amazon, when I faced any crisis after that, I pulled out this playbook. I pulled out I know what to do, right? Take ownership of the problem, start communicating really dramatically, make clear that you're dropping everything and you're pulling in anybody who can help and that you're humble about the problem. Accept help. Don't be like, we've got this. But instead be like, please come help. And that recipe, I never had as serious of a crisis as that again, partly because I learned to be more careful to avoid them. And, which was one of the lessons I know Amazon wanted me to take away, is like, okay, that wasn't so great. Please never do that again. And I dialed up my caution a solid notch. At the same time, I learned that playbook and I taught it to others and I ran it in other crises, and it hasn't failed me yet. I'm sure I could run into a problem that's too big to handle, or I could run into a leader who has no patience and like, nope, you're off the job. Obviously Damon was talking about baseball. At some point you pull the pitcher, right? And it's like, I understand you think you've got the batter and your next three are going to be unhittable pitches, but I can't take that risk right now. I haven't had that happen, but I understand, if you run the gamble enough times, you'll be pulled.
Do you feel like you were able to rebuild Jeff's trust to what it was before that incident overall, or is that kind of clear to you?
I would say it's clear in two ways. It's clear that I was in two ways. Number one, I was a director at that time. Jeff personally signed off on every VP promotion, and I was promoted to vice president 2 years later after working to regain trust. And so I think that's a clear signal, because there were few enough vice presidents. He didn't deeply review my promotion process, but he had to look at the list of names and be okay with it. And second, when I was leaving Amazon was near when Jeff was leaving Amazon. And I sent him a farewell note discussing this thing and just saying, hey, I don't know how well you remember this incident, but it really meant a lot to me. And I got a nice personal thank you for your time and help at Amazon note back. I can tell you I sent Jeff other things that he never bothered to reply to. So it wasn't like a reply was necessarily going to be forthcoming or expected. So I would say those two things show that I was able to rebuild the relationship.
So Ethan, here's another question I have for you. And it kind of goes back to the managing up thing and the way that you behaved in this moment, which was to take ownership. And managing up is like thinking about what can I do for you? It's like you're always putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and trying to think about it from their perspective. You pitch it that way. What's in it for me? Instead of just focusing on yourself and your own needs all the time. I do feel like sometimes when I get into class these days, or I'm managing up class, I'm talking to people, that I'll get some pushback. And it does typically tend to be from the younger people in the room, which is like, why do I have to do all that work? Why shouldn't they be thinking more about me? And I could see how this can play out in a toxic, unfair way. But what's your response to that criticism?
Well, first, there's irony here because I teach class on managing up as well. And I've heard the exact same pushback, of course. And my perspective on it is, your manager's incredibly busy. I don't know any, again, you do the show of hands trick in a room, which managers think they're overloaded and could use help. And, you get every hand, right? The manager's very busy. And so one reason you need to do it is the manager has good intentions, but there's a gap between good intentions and what they find time to do. Because you ask a manager, in your ideal world, how often would you engage your employees and learn what they're doing, whatever? And they say, daily or twice a week, or I'd be very available. And then you ask them, how do they feel they're doing? And most of them will say, not as well, and then you ask their employees how they're doing. And they're like, yeah, he or she's completely absent. That's one reason. The second reason is a more practical one, which is there's this word you used, which is should. And I tell people, if you wait around for everything that should be done, you're going nowhere. There should be no discrimination at workplaces. There should be no bias. There should be no glass ceiling. Your manager should be investing in your career and nurturing it on behalf of the business. Your manager should be highly skilled and both able to understand your actual work and your, soft skill needs. None of these things aren't going to happen. And so my practical argument to the people who push back is, well, would you like results or not? Because the person in the seat next to you is going to manage up, and they're going to do it both to help their manager and to help themselves, and they're going to succeed. And you're going to sit here stewing on what should be happening for you and isn't. And you're not only going to not get the opportunities, you're going to have a nice plate full of bitterness to go with it. So you pick your call.
Yes. I mean, look, I agree with those things too, because you just want to get practical. We had somebody else talk about when you talk about systemic problems that need to change, it's like those things are true. But the problem is they have an asymmetric cost. Like you pay more than an organization does for things like this. Like it's you that's being affected. So what do you want to do about it? But I also think that the way you laid out the magic loop is you are also giving yourself the opportunity to kind of improve your manager, because you build in a kind of quid pro quo. Like you build in the opportunity to help coach them and make them better. So it's just human beings trying to help each other out to do the best and put yourself in somebody else's shoes. But I am still interested what you would say about what do you do about a truly toxic boss, somebody who's what am I supposed to do with this person?
Oh, okay. Truly toxic boss. The only real answer there is get away. And so then the questions become how fast can you get away? So if you have an option to go get another job, you should take that option. If you don't have an option to immediately go get another job because it's a bad economy or you lack the skills or whatever, then you're going to have to be strategic and look at a couple things. One is, okay, what is my escape plan? Even if this escape plan is going to take 2 years, what do I think? How am I going to do it? And then the next thing is, how am I going to survive? In other words, I'm stuck here. how am I going to keep my own sanity? I'm going to bring people around me. I'm going to, suck up. We had a little bit of discussion about sucking up versus managing up. What am I going to do to avoid the problems or dodge and survive? And I think the last part of that is keeping your sanity outside of work, which is some managers will gaslight, for example. They'll tell you you're doing a bad job when you're not. Well, you need to disassociate your worth from your work performance. A huge step for me was establishing for myself, I am a human being with intrinsic worth, and that isn't tied to my work performance. I also aspire to be a really great performer and a top performer, and I care about that. But at the end of the day, it's the old cliche, no one ever died and said, I wish, on their deathbed said, I wish I'd spent more time at work. You have to separate your value from it. And that's how you can survive the toxic boss. Is say, well, yes, you are making, my work a living hell. And unfortunately, that's 8 or 10 hours a day. But you aren't my self-worth. And by the way, I have a secret plan to escape. So it's a little bit like I'm doing the push-ups in the cell or whatever. I'm breaking the rocks, but I'm also at night digging the tunnel. And so do I hate working on the chain gang for the evil sheriff in all the bad movies who's beating, sure. But that just motivates me all the more to dig the tunnel at night because, Shawshank Redemption or something, I am getting out of here. I have to keep you off my back long enough.
Thanks for simultaneously showcasing the power of a good analogy.
And what I like about what you're saying there is a couple of things, which I think is very important, is that realize that don't let it affect your self-worth because it's really probably not you, it's them, right? So don't let them crush your confidence and belief in yourself. And 2, have confidence in knowing that, hey, I got a plan. I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to end up getting out of here. So I think that that's great. And I think Darren and I could probably sit here for another couple hours and keep talking to you about all of this.
That's a great way to frame it too. That they made me smarter. Instead of showing off how smart you are, that, they're making me feel smarter. They're making the business feel like you're thinking about the potential, with bringing these ideas in. I know we should start wrapping this up, but I have just one more question. Since we're so focused on how to get to leadership, you have also helped promote people into senior roles, and you've had people that worked for you promoted into those VP roles. What are just the top couple of things that make those people so compelling to promote?
2 things. They get things done. In the end, work isn't about how hard you work. It's about the impact of what you accomplish. So hours are nice, but impact is what matters. And the second is trust. Is this someone I can trust their judgment? Because I can't always be there, nor do I want to. And they don't have to be flawless. To your point about Jeff, people can make mistakes. But are their mistakes going to be few and well-reasoned? And are they going to own them? So it's about, do I trust this person? And that's the point you made about me with Jeff, is I did things that if you were Jeff would have earned your trust. Is okay, sure, this guy made a mistake, but I can trust him in a high-stakes situation. Those are the 2 things then, is it's great I can trust you, but that's not enough if you're not getting anything done. And if you're getting a lot done, but I can't trust you, that's really dangerous, because I have to watch you. And so I can't scale that. So it's those 2 things.
Yeah, that's a great answer.